everyone. Today we continue our series on Africa, Africa the way forward. And we have another multidisciplinary approach to the subject. You may recall that we started with Dr. Bangura, and just to mention, an expert in many fields. And then we proceeded with Dr. Victor Udo, who is also in various capacities, developmental oriented. We then moved on to Dr. Eluche, who is an attorney, but with interest in development. So today we have Dr. Kole Ade Odutola, who is also in the multidisciplinary field. He has a BS in botany, a master's degree in TV video for development from the University of Reading in the UK, a master's in organizational communication, learning and design from Ithaca College in the US, and to cap it all, a PhD in media studies at the School of Communication, Information, and Library Science at Rutgers University. His publication, Diaspora and Imagination, was published in 2012 by Carolina Academic Press. Let us note that Ade has worked as a production assistant and a scriptwriter in television and radio stations, as a freelance producer, director of documentaries on development and also on environmental issues. He was the assistant producer for Lola Family Coyote's Mind Bending, and the assistant director for O Blow. Let us know that he's also a poet. So what does this truly multidisciplinary scholar have to offer on the issue of African development and the way forward? Let us find out. Over to you, sir.
Okay then. Thank you very much, Professor Megwali, for this opportunity to share my thoughts. But you will please grant me the indulgence to intimate you with minutes, what I call minutes of the last meeting that was held just yesterday. The panelists for the Africa Soft Power series deliberated on Africa, what next? The focus of this discussion was the media and how Africans keep selling themselves short. How can we change our very valid observations that we sell ourselves short? For instance, it is said, and I quote from one of the participants, that if an Ethiopian wants to know about the United States, he or she connects to CNN or remembers Iron Man. If a Vietnamese wants to know about Africa or Nigeria, they tune to CNN and to BBC. What this person is saying is, so how does Africa itself represent itself and people can get the knowledge about what Africa is? At the conclusion of the webinar on Africa Soft Power, my take was that there is an urgent need to have a global day of forgiveness by Africans. We need to forgive ourselves and move on to a new day and a new beginning. I did not suggest how this would ever happen though. In addition, have also suggested that at the end of the webinar, that all panelists form an informal network for African Media Consolidation Forum. The webinar ended, and each person went their separate ways. But I'm here today wearing another cap, and I'm going to take us through again. There is hardly any need to review the present situation on the continent of Africa. I think all we need to do is to read and act upon minutes of the last meetings. There is a trove of action plans, simulations, and SWOT analysis on almost all aspects of life on the African continent. I would be very surprised if 70% of you who will engage this recording will be aware of a document on tourism in Africa that was commissioned by the World Bank. It's a 271-page document. The question is, who is paying attention to such expensive documents produced on Africa's behalf? Apart from that particular document, please allow me to pose a few more questions. How possible is it for the continent of Africa to finance its own development? Or what is the Lagos Plan of Action, the Abuja Treaty, NEPAD, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, CAADP? Or are you aware that there is a document called the Minimum Integration Program, MIP, or the Accelerated Industrial Development of Africa, AIDA? Oh, let's even go down there. The African Union / NEPAD Science and Technology Consolidated Plan. Africa's Afro-Industry and Agribusiness Initiative. These are all documents that are in the public domain, and I wonder whether academics, scholars are engaging enough and insisting that some of these things be done. For those of you who already know, there's no need preaching to the choir, that the Abuja Treaty resulted in the adoption of the treaty establishing the African Economic Community in June 1991. The treaty entered into force on the 12th of May 1994. The African Economic Community was established as an integral part of the then OAU with the primary aim of promoting the integration of African economies. I don't think we need a rocket scientist to tell us how well we have done, or how much of it we know, or how much of it we have engaged or educated ourselves. I have looked up a number of these treaties and uncovered the richness in text deployed to articulate a vision for the continent. My worry for now is that not much has happened to the spirit and the letters of the documents. There is really no way forward for the African continent, in my opinion. What exists now is an uphill task of turning academics to activists. This extractive social science research needs to be replaced by a more participatory action research. And I would not ask young scholars or burden emerging scholars with the problem of having to tell their universities or their academy what they're doing. But I turn my gaze to professors who are close to retiring in the various Western institutions, that there is a need to find ways of engaging at the community level for social transformation. Therefore, what remains of my presentation I wish to recommend new modes of engagement with grassroots groups and the creation or imagination of new alternative modes of wealth, knowledge creation, and its dissemination. There is a saying in the Yoruba language that whosoever speaks English in the house of the in-laws is duty bound to translate. So then, what does participatory action research entail? In the context of participatory action research, PAR, the philosophy is to establish as quickly as possible an egalitarian, authentic participation among those involved. To participate essentially means to have meaningful influence, in parentheses, control, on how decisions are made. That is a quotation from S.E. Smith, a 1997 publication. We can go into details of this oppositional mode of knowledge production, and it is not an alternative to the extractive social science mode. So, in the usual way, I said participatory action methodology, oppositional or alternative way of knowing. A topic such as mine, with a yes or no answer, would have been very easy in other discursive spaces. I would just have answered my own question and left it at that. Since this is a gathering and an asynchronous one, where we're not interacting, those of you with the business of understanding relationship of how the world works, meaning of words, and social structures, I will take a little more time explaining where I'm coming from and where I intend to go with this tangential topic. I will eventually answer the question of what participatory action research is and why it is thought to be oppositional rather than alternative to mainstream social science methodology. Before my time is up, let me first establish the difference between alternative and oppositional, using lifestyles as my springboard. Raymond Williams, the British cultural studies thinker, on the one hand, argues that a person who lives an alternative lifestyle is, in quote, someone who simply finds a different way to live and wishes to be left alone with it, end of quote. On the other hand, someone with an oppositional lifestyle is said to be someone, and I quote, who finds a different way to live and wants to change society in its light. This is as cited by Mukherjee and Skudon. It could be found on page 146. A quick transposition from lifestyle to research renders a clear picture of the fundamental differences between the two worlds. To further go after the differences, Sean avers that, and I quote, traditional forms of scholarship, the ones we normally live within our institutional context, place a heavy emphasis on technical rationality, a form of knowledge which values facts and information, and which is generated by conventional kinds of research. The research tests knowledge against the standardized criteria of hard scientific analysis and technique, end of quote. I guess there is no need expatiating on the histories of science and that of social science, especially what counts or does not count as knowledge. At this point, it is very possible to begin opening various windows as a way of allowing winds of philosophical currents into the room. Should I decide to take the course of action, my first window, therefore, will be the conceptual window of methodology. What is methodology? Without sounding to lecture you on what, but it gives a context to my own discussion and helps me also to understand the direction I'm going. So what do both methodology and methods have in relation to epistemology? The beauty of window opening is that one window leads to another until we're all blinded with light and transformed by heat. To make my task easy, I turned to Wikipedia, the people-driven fount of knowledge, for a quick definition of methodology. It presented three options: the analysis of the principles of method, rules, and postulates employed by discipline, one. The second, the systematic study of methods that are, can be, or have been applied within a discipline. And last but not the least, methodology is also a particular procedure or set of procedures. Methodology, therefore, includes the following concepts as it relates to particular discipline or field of inquiry. One, a collection of theories, concepts, or ideas. Two, comparative study of different approaches. And three, a critique of the individual methods. I promise not to detain you any further at the window of methodology and its shadow. My next concern is to relate the methods we deploy in knowing about the world around us to what we know and how we know what we know. Epistemology, we are told, is a science of knowledge, meaning a systematic investigation and transformation of information, observation, and beliefs into knowledge. There are various schools of thought on how societies or communities construct knowledge, or what to them knowledge is. In the academic sphere, there are rules, conventions, and codes that guide researchers on what is acceptable to each field or discipline. To tell comprehensively the story of participatory action research, we need to get to the memory lane of how positivists, people tend to make an error about positive and positivists. This was a movement, and they became the main drivers of the knowledge industry. Those who believe that everything is measurable and the empiricism that goes with it. So they became the main drivers of the knowledge industry. This scientific but extractive research model became the norm by which other forms of knowledge creation were evaluated. The idea of participation in most developing countries has been, the notion of participation in most developing countries has been the concern of development scholars. Jules Petty, in 1995, identified 7 variants of the concept, ranging from manipulative participation to self-mobilization. And Muwerera, in 1991, defines participatory action research as a collective research, which has the aim of discovering the community truth, its culture, knowledge, science, history, institutions, organizations, ontology, and practice. The initial agenda of participatory research proponents was to replace the conventional hierarchical approach, which sets researchers apart from their subjects. They privilege dialogue and oral construction based on the, I quote, epistemological assumption that knowledge is constructed socially. Stuart Hall in 1992 on page 20. In effect, they contested the sole authorship model. To achieve wide participation, they devised and experimented with various techniques. Techniques such as community drama, drawings and construction of murals, photo novels, storytelling, and other forms of interaction that would allow for a free flow of repressed information. That is still Stuart Hall. Most researchers agree that participatory methodology works well in yielding problem description and generation of new perspectives and ideas through visualization and group analysis. Well, as a critique, its main weakness is that the analysis is based on information drawn from the memory of community groups or notes and diagrams provided by them. Within this context, the introduction of cheap, portable, user-friendly video cameras was a godsend. It quickly became an integral part of the toolkit of some participatory action researchers as a record-making device with capability for instant feedback and subsequent replay of moments that occurred during the interaction. In effect, it freed the production values produced in the course of the participatory action research also as a matter of concern. While Christy Coase talks about the messiness of production, Rocha simply refers to the participatory action research videos as, in quote, films of discomfort, as cited by Tomaselli. The proponents of high technical quality argue that poor sound quality and wobbly pictures do not accurately represent the participants. On the one hand, the experience of Michaels and Kelly in 1984 with the Warlpiri Aboriginal group in Australia shows that when people are left to discover their own filmic lexicon, we learn more about their worldview. We learn more about their worldview. We also get to, just a minute. We get to learn more about their worldview. So participatory methods are based on the phenomenological paradigm, which accepts that knowledge is the result of interaction between people. It also accepts the premise that the researcher is part of this construction of facts, not independent of it. Hammond defines participatory action research as a methodology of researching, analyzing, and carrying out actions that directly benefit members, or if you like, stakeholders of a community, end of quote. In addition, she avers that participatory action research is a method that emphasizes working in collaboration with others to develop research questions, conduct research, analyze findings, present results, and create actions. The binary opposition of researcher and object/subject of research is thus ruptured, leaving the terrain for collective participation. Then comes the question, whose voice is heard and whose knowledge counts becomes a struggle that defines a participatory project. Craig and Porter in 1997 argued that there is an irresolvable contradiction between participation, which proposes to allow marginalized people the free space and control to discover and disseminate their potentials, and effective management, which requires meeting certain objectives, many already established long before the project begins. They use the access people have to the project resources as an indicator of their control over the research process. There's no doubt that the source of his idea has been polluted and diluted. If a praxis of participatory action research can facilitate development at the grassroots and even the urban centers, why is it not popular with African scholars? And why has it not gained currency within the academia? Joyce Hammond says, participatory action research is an inquiry process in which people ask questions that are important to them. It allows people to research questions that can then make informed decisions about and then act upon. In asking those questions and working with others, they build capacity because they are working with each other. They are finding out the power of learning and sharing knowledge with one another. And this is something that becomes very relevant to their lives. It is also a cyclic, repeatable process so that people can find out information, act on them, and assess their actions. Alana James advised that participatory action research can be deployed by a group of people, either formal or informal groups. People who are working to get something done, either personally, professionally, party, or community. She recognizes 4 stages of participatory action research loop. There is the diagnosis of the situation, action to improve the situation, measurement or evaluation of the effectiveness of the action taken, and finally, reflection on what was learned and planning for the next stage. It is more of a process or a series of cycles that keeps moving in different directions. So let me start winding down, but not before I ask these questions. When you're on the field, even as a professor who is about retiring, and you have decided to go onto the field to work with people, you will constantly ask yourself, what is my concern? Why am I concerned? How can I show the situation as it is, as I monitor it, and the situation itself changes? How can I gather data around the situation? And how can I monitor my own practice? How can I be reasonably confident with my conclusions as fair and accurate? How do I modify my practice in the light of the evaluation? This is not the kind of thing in which, like the academia, after 3 years, somebody's reviewing your work, looking for loopholes. No, this is something that reforms your practice. And like it is said, theory informs practice and practice informs theory, as Paulo Freire would say. So diagnosis of a situation. This is when you look around for information, look for what others have done, and talk to people. Action to improve the situation. Every step by step, everyone counts. The bigger the problem, the more people that are needed. Focus on what you're doing right. No need for an adult eye. So measurement or evaluation of the effectiveness of action taken. Keep a diary of your actions. Keep a record of what you're doing and what you are enjoying. Look for changes. And finally, reflection on what was learned. Reflection helps us to know what we can celebrate, what worked and what was challenging. Notice your joy level. If you're not enjoying it, then you're probably not on the right track. And then the planning for the next stage. What are the complex adaptive issues? So the tension between the ideals we hold in our heads. I would in short just wrap up now with this. The tension between the ideals we hold in our heads and the actual reality we face, if we think it should be in a particular way. So, in effect, what I'm trying to propose here, it doesn't fit in with what happens in the West, the kind of papers we write, the kind of research we do. But is it possible for professors who are at the twilight of their career to engage communities on the African continent? As they study, there is action. This is a transformative action. It is not one in which you simply either describe or analyze the situation. This is something that as you are there on ground, there will be changes. And sometimes it's very political. You lead the people on to confront their own oppressors. You're not really looking for publication, as it were, but you're looking to affect the lives of people. And this is what I think, that with a groundswell of a number of professors that are in Western institutions across the world, if they dare return home and decide to work at that level with people, to get involved in their concerns, that maybe, just maybe, we might be heading towards a new way of doing things on the continent. So this is where I would, for now, stop. If there are questions or contributions, I will be happy to take them.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to give us this very illuminating talk. And we have learned quite a few things here. I gather from your presentation two major ideas. Number one, and very important, number one, we have to make use of all these programs and plans of action and so on that the United Nations, that other regional groups, researchers, and so on have produced. And I've always reflected on the fact that in the 90s, well, in the 80s, there were many scholars who wrote lots of stuff. At Ahmadu Bello University, we had very vibrant groups discussing development. We had a lot of conferences, we had visiting speakers, and so on and so on. But have these been implemented? So, that came to my mind, even at the level of earlier research by, many different scholars. So it's something that we have to bear in mind. We have a lot of information out there, but the implementation is missing. And that's what correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what I got from the first part of your presentation. That, I don't know if you want to add anything to that before we move on to the second.
Well, you've said it all. The amount of information about things that are intentions as Africans that were placed out there, and money, some of them, yes, some people said that they were just copied and pasted, taken from different places, that these were taken from different places instead of original thinking. It does. I really don't I'm really not concerned about where they come from, but what I'm concerned about is that we have these documents. People came from different countries on the African continent to really put them together. They have done so in very beautiful words, but what is lacking is I can't see the activity on ground. I can't see the transformation that they all have promised. And I think this is when we all need to start to engage those documents, to look at them, sometimes even teach them in our classes. There is the African Union Agenda 2063, that already has a picture for the future of Africa in 50 years from now. We need to engage those, even to those scholars that are still active, to learn about it, to learn about what is there and be able to critique it and teach it to the others and let the students know so that they grow with it. But I'm not sure how many of us are aware of some documents, or if we are, what we're doing with them. So that's what I would say for now.
So we probably have to bring together these documents in a database. If we bring the NEPAD, African Union, Abuja, all these documents emanating from those, bring them together in the first place and take it from there. Okay, well, the second part of your illuminating presentation was about research methodology. And the research methodology that you suggest is basically participatory research. Actually, I was happy when you mentioned Freire, follow Freire, because I was about to thinking of asking, his pedagogy of the oppressed, whether this is something you had in mind as well. And you mentioned Freire. But you're saying that the retired professors should engage in this. Don't forget, some of the retired professors are tired. But anyway.
Not in the American setting. They are still as active as can be. And yes, many of them now, they have a contract with the university maybe to teach a class a semester or something. Workload is light. They've become full professors. There's nothing else they want other than to add value to what they have done. And the tiredness is not mental. Even if it is physical, there's no heavy lifting when you're going to communities that you know and you understand and facilitate their movement. This will be my reaction.
Yeah, well, I think the big point to make here is that when these professors return, they shouldn't just isolate themselves from the community. And that if they are continuing to do research, make a little change here and involve the community. And by that methodology, I think there would be a richer flow of ideas back and forth. So you gave us, you reminded us about methodology, what it's all about, and this is useful. You also talked about epistemology and the relationship between these concepts. So in terms of questions, additional questions, I think one of the issues seems to be the sources of the information that you referred to in terms of methodology. But I think you made it clear from the beginning or from the start or in your comments that you really didn't bother about where the information came from. The important thing is to get the information. Am I right here?
Well, yeah, I mean, without an understanding of the audience, you know that for all of these things is also dependent on the audience that you're talking to, what you want, who they are, and what would interest them. I didn't want to bore anybody with too much citations, but these are all, I mean, the action research for many of us grew out of the critical theory. Critical theory was exactly an attempt by the Frankfurt School of Thinkers, Honecker, Adorno, and the rest, to reconcile the social structural determinist and action insights of Marx and the personal psychology, both conscious and unconscious. So there are times when you can go to that level to invoke some of these scholars that have done things. And there are times when you just remain at the level of a popular and the superficial. It all depends. There's a rigor that goes into popular action research. And it was quite interesting that you were talking about ABU. ABU happens to have been the seat of the MPTA, the Nigerian Popular Theatre Alliance, of Steve Oga, Jenks, and Uguguila, you know, and all of this was part of what they were using. They were using drama for social transformation. And I think they did some work outside of Zaria and even came as far as to Shomolu in Lagos in those days. I guess they are also getting tired and retired now. So I don't know whether they're still active in the communities doing the work. But yes, ABU had Professor Steve Oga as the arrowhead of the Nigerian Popular Theatre Alliance, NPTA.
The Global Day of Forgiveness. Can you comment a bit about that, please?
Yes, I could very much. It's when I attend these webinars, my real concern is that webinars are becoming a drug and people are getting high on them and just attending. And after the attendance, everybody goes home and nothing happens. And I have heard over and again, you know, all of these documents of the African Union, they're not working because of one thing. There's no trust on the African continent because of our allegiances to our former colonial masters. Let's be clear about this. The Francophone still have allegiance to France. The Anglophone might not have as much allegiance to Britain, but some of the ideas and the perspectives and the influence on the ground is still affecting the translation of some of these documents. The easy movements. There's right now Ghana and Nigeria, with Ghana trying to expel Nigerian traders. We all harbor animosities against each other on the African continent. And by the time you come to the diaspora, there are a lot of Africans who do not understand the struggles that the African Americans have gone through. And that is why I think that instead of harbor this, somebody has talked about the post-slavery traumatic syndrome. We just pretend as if it's okay to have gone through such a trauma, to have learned about them, that it doesn't affect us in any way. It doesn't shape our behavior in any way. We have not found a way to come together and forgive each other and start on a clean slate. And that is why I was calling that even if we're going to have communication, we're going to have a media conglomerate. Because why is it that Africans are the first to make money for others? Netflix is the darling of everybody on the continent now. It's not owned by Africans. What it means is that for every click you have, for everything you go, you're giving the money to the owners of Netflix. Why can't Africans have their own? It's all about trust. It's all about not forgiving each other. And I believe that that is the basis of what we need to do, to call Africans together and say, let us forgive each other. Uhuru Kenyatta did it after the elections. He called the opposition and he said, I'm sorry. He called his vice president and said, look, let us tell them we're sorry. I don't know what happened after that, but at least that gesture, I don't know what it did, but it totally, for me, it disarmed the opposition at least for 5 minutes before they go back into the trench. This is a very important part that we're all missing. We're not going forward because when we sit at table, we don't even know how much animosity we bear against each other. So what you're seeing presently are the effects of all of those. We leave the meetings that we've said fantastic things, but we don't even believe a word of what was said because you don't trust the other person. You're looking at and watching out what is their interest in this. So that's why I offered. But like everything else, nobody bothered. It wasn't even taken up. It wasn't discussed at all. It was just a blip. It was from a mind that probably had drank too much or eaten a little much. But that's what I think.
Thank you. By the way, I should say though, you mentioned the Francophone countries. First of all, that's just one language spoken, one old colonial language spoken in the region. But I think there's a distinction between the people and the politicians. The people generally don't want to see this domination by Macron and his people. But it's the politicians, the puppet politicians, you know, the Alassans and so on, that we might be talking about. But thank you so much. I mean, we have really learned quite a lot. And I do hope that the people listening to this webinar will continue to discuss. By the way, what's your contact address? Because they may want to send you an email.
It's very simple. It's KOLE and then the figure 2 at yahoo.com. KOLE 2. Just 2, not CWO, just 2 at yahoo.com.
Oh, wow, you've really simplified it. Okay, so please, drop in a line as we continue this discussion. Thank you very much for your wonderful insights.
Thank you very much, Prof.
You're welcome.